And I thought we let him get to the rim too easily. That was pretty much the story of when we had our defensive failings. It was our one-on-one D. We tried to wait until they caught the ball.
Our one-on-one. Why are we letting people play one-on-one all game? Why are we letting people play one-on-one all game with no help?
Listen closely to what just took place, because it is entirely infuriating. The Indiana Fever recently gave up an astonishing 60 points in the paint during their matchup with the Atlanta Dream. Let that sink in for a moment. 60 points scored right under the basket. Meanwhile, Caitlin Clark found herself in early foul trouble due to a series of questionable phantom calls that the coaching staff never bothered to challenge from the sideline.
Allowing people to play one-on-one the whole time, Stephanie White, you book.
Yeah, I thought we let him get to the rim too easily. That was pretty much the story of when we had our defensive failings. It was our one-on-one D. We tried to wait until they caught the ball to defend. We didn't make it difficult for them to pass the ball around the perimeter, and they're fast. When they catch it on the run and attack our feet, we're already behind. And there were some times where we didn't have rotations. I thought they did an excellent job in terms of their spacing to make our rotation.
This is where the situation becomes truly disheartening. When the head coach takes the podium after the game, she refuses to accept any responsibility for a defensive strategy that is completely broken. Instead of owning up to it, she shifts the blame entirely onto her players' individual one-on-one defense. It is worth noting that this is the exact same defensive system she put in place, the very one that has repeatedly failed them throughout the entire season.
Do you think, did y'all watch the finals? Do you think the Knicks let San Antonio Spurs players go one-on-one at Jalen Brunson all game? No, we're not letting you go one-on-one at Jalen Brunson all game. This clown of a coach is the only one that thinks it's acceptable and the only one that is confused when teams are getting to the rim and getting fouled because you're playing one-on-one defense. You're allowing people to dribble one-on-one, no help side defense, nothing. You went right back to the old stupid stuff you was doing versus the Valkyries, versus the Portland Fire, versus a bunch of these other teams.
Somehow, in her mind, she is never the one at fault. The strategy forces the players to guard opponents completely straight up without any support, leaving them entirely exposed to Stephanie White's game plan, only for the coaching staff to dismiss the failure as a simple issue of player execution.
They did. And there were some times where we didn't have rotations. I thought they did an excellent job in terms of their spacing to make our rotations very difficult. But we've got to be able to guard one-on-one, and more than anything, we got to defend without fouling. We cannot continue to let people live, in the 20s and 30s in terms of free throw attempts. We just got to be better.
When she addresses the media, what she is actually outlining is a fundamentally flawed defensive structure. Her players are routinely left isolated on an island, with absolutely no help side rotation arriving to support them when they get beat.
Ash.
How much did that play a part in closing with KK for much of that last couple minutes?
It played a big part, and KK was doing a great job on the boards. Her length, she gets deflection, she gets steals, she's active, she's mobile enough to guard multiple positions. She does a really good job of anticipating, and she just gave us a different look.
I'm not trying to come at Michaela Timpson. Solid young player, learning, growing. She has no business being in the game late in the fourth quarter down the stretch. The fact that
virtually every other franchise in the league utilizes standard help defense whenever an on-ball defender gets bypassed off the dribble. However, Stephanie White's system rigidly forces these athletes into grueling one-on-one matchups for the entire 40 minutes, and she then acts completely baffled when opposing guards drive straight to the basket without meeting any resistance. Honestly, this pattern is what makes the situation look so terrible for the coaching staff. The Fever dealt with the exact same issue when they played the Valkyries. When asked about what went wrong inside the paint, the explanation falls short.
We did. I thought that group really dug in on the defensive end of the floor, got stops. We rebounded it well, and we moved it on offense. We made it a little bit more difficult because the ball got side to side. We got some higher quality looks and knocked them down.
I can't stand this lady, bro. I can't stand. The fact that she always takes every opportune moment. She never steps up to the podium like a leader and takes accountability. She's looking to pass the buck at every single opportunity. It makes me sick. She never addresses the sorry stuff her and her.
They experienced the identical glaring vulnerability against Portland. We are witnessing multiple games plagued by the exact same devastating defensive collapses, yet after every single loss, White returns to the press conference to blame the players' execution rather than self-reflecting on her own flawed system. The breakdowns happen in various ways, whether through post entries or perimeter drives. It involves multiple reads across different areas, and the team simply fails to disrupt the opposition's rhythm before they reach the three-point line. This exact scenario played out against the Valkyries, it happened against Portland, and it has occurred against numerous other opponents all year long, turning the situation into an absolute circus. Now, she is publicly analyzing floor spacing, complaining about the difficulty of rotations, and blaming the complexities of the modern game. But notice what she is actively avoiding. If you watch the NBA Finals or any high-level playoff basketball, teams like the New York Knicks do not leave their players isolated. They do not let opponents attack Jalen Brunson all night without help. They rotate fluidly as a unit and make real-time adjustments to protect their players. That is fundamental basketball philosophy taught at every competitive level. Yet, Stephanie White treats the concept that good floor spacing makes defensive rotations difficult as if it were a brand new revelation. Let's look at the facts. The Atlanta Dream did not score 60 points in the paint because their spacing was legendary or because they revolutionized modern offense. It happened because the Indiana Fever's defensive scheme offered zero resistance at the point of attack. When perimeter defenders get beat and know that no backup help is coming, opponents will relentlessly attack the rim on every single possession. This is basic coaching 101, and the fact that it is missing on the court is mind-boggling. What should genuinely worry every Fever fan watching right now is White's complete refusal to use her coach's challenge. Look at Caitlin Clark's situation. She picked up several highly debatable fouls in the opening half, whistles that directly prevented her from playing aggressive, physical defense. A sharp, engaged coaching staff immediately reviews those moments with their assistants and challenges the obvious refereeing errors to protect their franchise cornerstone. White did not challenge a single call. Consequently, Clark was forced to sit on the bench in severe foul trouble, completely neutralized while the Atlanta Dream easily built a massive advantage. For White to later complain in the press conference about her players being unable to guard one-on-one without fouling is incredibly bold. A head coach cannot have it both ways. You either protect your star player from weak whistles by utilizing your challenges, or you accept that she will have to play timid defense just to stay on the floor. White chose neither option. Instead, she stood by passively, allowed the bad calls to stand, and then criticized the resulting defensive effort as a failure of player execution. It is simply poor game management. This is where the massive divide between the coaching staff and reality becomes obvious to everyone. White went out of her way to praise KK's length and deflections during critical late-game minutes. To be fair, KK brings great energy and defensive flexibility to the court. However, she is still a rookie who is learning the nuances of professional spacing and high-stakes decision-making. When the Fever desperately needed a closer in the fourth quarter, Caitlin Clark was being aggressively double-teamed with no reliable shooting threat on the perimeter to pass to. Every time the ball found KK in the corner, it was clear she was unsure of how to attack. The front office certainly failed to secure a dependable stretch four in the offseason, a personnel error that lands on Amber Cox and management, but the coaches are fully aware of these roster limitations. You cannot try to win tight, crucial professional games by relying on a rookie who isn't a perimeter threat, especially when your star point guard is being trapped the moment she touches the ball. Yet, the head coach never addresses the failures that belong to her and her staff. Watch how strategically Stephanie White frames the brief comeback the team made while Caitlin Clark was resting on the bench. She immediately credits the lineup for digging in defensively and moving the ball well, which is standard basketball commentary. Teams go on runs. But she uses that brief, isolated stretch of success to distract from the massive, systemic defensive flaws that plagued them for the rest of the night. The reality of the box score remains unchanged. The Atlanta Dream still scored 60 points in the paint. The Fever still gave up 20 points off turnovers and surrendered 17 fast break points. A single good stretch in the second half does not wipe away 3/4 of total defensive collapse. Notice this troubling pattern in her leadership. Whenever the team struggles, it is labeled a failure of player execution, but the moment things go well for a few minutes, it is praised as a brilliant collective effort. White never steps up to the microphone to admit that the coaching staff made mistakes, the strategy was wrong, or that they adjusted too late. That level of accountability never comes. It is time to look at the situation realistically, because she continues to talk about how turnovers and poor shot selection caused all those transition points. Of course, live ball turnovers hurt any team. But let's be honest about who she is implying is at fault. Caitlin Clark practically carried the entire offense through the first 3 quarters, while Kelsey Mitchell was quiet and Aliyah Boston struggled to finish right at the rim. It was Clark's elite passing and vision that kept Indiana competitive. So when Stephanie White points to turnovers as the main issue, she is subtly criticizing the one player who kept them in the game. Yes, the Dream scored 20 points off turnovers, but the larger issue is that they scored 60 points in the paint during standard half-court sets where the defense was fully formed. That is the real problem. The transition points are just a symptom. The actual disease is a defensive scheme that permits uncontested, straight-line drives to the basket. White keeps putting bandages on the symptoms while ignoring the underlying issue ruining this roster. True professional leadership requires accountability. When a team allows 60 points in the paint for the 3rd time in a single season while running the exact same defensive system, you cannot blame the players' one-on-one defense. A real leader looks in the mirror and admits the strategy is not working. You make adjustments during the game. You try a zone defense to throw off the opponent's rhythm, experiment with different rotations to fix the gaps, and use your challenges to protect your best players. White does none of this. Instead, she relies on the same failed approach game after game, then acts surprised when opponents exploit the exact same weaknesses. She refuses to challenge momentum-killing calls that put her best asset in foul trouble, routinely closes tight games with lineups that lack perimeter shooting, and when it results in another loss, she blames everyone except herself and her staff. The most frustrating part is that this collapse was entirely predictable. White arrived from Connecticut with a big reputation as a defensive mastermind, and hiring Brianne January was supposed to strengthen that identity on the bench. Yet, despite the expectations, the Indiana Fever's defensive rating has been alarmingly poor all season. There are no creative schemes to cover up their weaknesses, no unexpected zone looks to disrupt opponents, and no meaningful adjustments when the primary plan fails. It is just the same exposed one-on-one defense night after night, followed by press conferences where the coach wonders why opposing guards get to the rim so easily. Think about what this environment does to the long-term growth of a young talent like Caitlin Clark. You have a rookie carrying a massive offensive burden for the franchise, enduring physical play every night and navigating inconsistent officiating, all while her own coach refuses to protect her by challenging obvious bad calls. The staff fails to surround her with the proper situational personnel and refuses to run a modern defensive system that keeps her from being isolated against quicker guards without backup. That is not a formula for long-term organizational success. The roster construction is deeply flawed. The front office absolutely should have targeted a veteran stretch four and added defensive versatility to the frontcourt during the offseason. However, professional coaches must work with the roster they have, and a competent staff finds creative ways to maximize talent while minimizing weaknesses. White's staff fails on both counts. What makes this situation so concerning going forward is the constant pattern of public deflection. The great coaches in sports history take full responsibility when things go wrong. They protect their players in front of the media and hold them accountable behind closed doors. Stephanie White does the exact opposite. She routinely critiques her own players in front of reporters while refusing to acknowledge her own strategic errors. That behavior damages locker room trust and creates a negative environment where players feel set up to fail, only to be blamed for the results. Running a one-on-one defensive scheme with no help side rotation is a coaching choice, not an execution error. When that strategy fails repeatedly, continuing to run it is not loyalty to a system, it is coaching incompetence. Every other team in the WNBA teaches its players to rotate when the primary defender gets beat. The Indiana Fever stand alone in leaving their players stranded and then acting shocked when opponents score 60 points in the paint. Where does the franchise go from here? The season is underway, and the Fever are tied to this coaching staff for now. But if this pattern persists, if Stephanie White continues to blame young players for structural failures and refuses to make basic modern adjustments, a change must be made at the top. You cannot waste Caitlin Clark's historic rookie season by pairing her with coaching that falls below professional standards. You cannot expect players to perfectly execute a structurally flawed system and blame them when it fails. The question for the Indiana front office is simple. How many times are you willing to watch the same movie before realizing the ending will not change? How many 60-point quarters in the paint will it take to admit this archaic defensive scheme does not work? How many press conferences will you sit through watching the head coach blame the roster before recognizing a leadership problem? Fever fans are watching their promising team's potential get wasted by a coaching staff that refuses to adapt. They are watching a generational talent deal with phantom fouls that never get challenged, witnessing defensive breakdowns that basic help rotations could fix, and watching a head coach point fingers at everyone in the building except the person who designed the strategy. That is unacceptable at this level of basketball. And if this cycle continues, the front office must step in and make a structural change before squandering a historic era with one of the most talented players the game has ever seen. What do you think about this situation? Is this a player execution issue, or are Stephanie White's coaching decisions and lack of accountability the real problem? Share your thoughts and theories in the comments below.
Multiple, there's when you get layups, 20 points off of turnovers, 17 fast break points. It's our turnovers are killing us. Our turnovers, some of our poor shot selection, they go down the other end, you get a layup most of the time. So that was part of it. Some of it was poor rotation.
Nah, it's the turnovers. Are you talking about Caitlin Clark turnovers? Because she carried y'all through the first 3 quarters. While Kelsey Mitchell was a no-show, Aliyah Boston was missing bunnies all game up until the fourth. Don't talk